that have said we are immune. But what we learned, I think, from Tunisia and now Libya is that it's very hard to predict revolutions before they happen. No one saw Tunisia and Egypt coming.
Shadi, thank you very much indeed. Let's take you now across to the Egyptian capital, Cairo. These are live pictures coming in from Tahrir Square. Thousands of people gathering in the square, calling for constitutional change. We know the country's new Prime Minister, Essam Sharaf, is expected to address the crowd. In fact, he is walking out, but let's go over now to Ayman Mohyeddin, our correspondent overlooking Tahrir Square. Ayman, just talk us through these pictures. What are we seeing happening in the square?
Well, Darren, right over my shoulder, I can actually see out of frame the shot of the stage. And actually, we understand that Dr. Essam Sharaf is actually going to make his way to that stage in a short bit. There were reports earlier that he actually had arrived. That was according to a lot of local Egyptian reports. And a lot of people actually on Twitter who had seen him were reporting that he was here a short while ago. One of the people on the stage did go to the speakers and actually announced that he was on his way to the stage. So we can expect that he will be here addressing the crowds in a little bit. It's certainly going to be a very historic moment to see an Egyptian Prime Minister address this revolutionary crowd. These protesters behind me have been here for several weeks. They have been demanding a real and substantial change. Today, they are going to hear from a Prime Minister who was undoubtedly one of them, because before President Hosni Mubarak stepped down from power, the current Prime Minister Essam Sharaf was among these protesters behind us. In fact, his name was one of the names that was submitted to the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces as a potential Prime Minister when they were considering replacing the outgoing Ahmed Shafiq. So we are expecting him at some point today to address the crowds. It's very crowded near the stage. We're not sure when he'll get here, but you can imagine that it is going to be a very historic moment. And certainly the round of applause that he got when his name was announced was very overwhelming. You can only imagine what it's going to be like when he does address the crowd.
As you say, Ayman, Prime Minister Ahmed Shafiq resigned. That was a key demand of the protesters. I mean, clearly that satisfied certainly one of their big demands.
Yes, indeed. You know, when you talk about the demands of the protesters, it certainly seems like a very long list of constant reforms and constant changes, not only to the changes in the structure of the government, but also to the personalities. They wanted to see the Prime Minister, former Prime Minister rather, and other senior officials of his cabinet step down because they were too closely affiliated with the previous regime, particularly President Hosni Mubarak. But their list of demands really goes beyond just symbolic faces and personalities. They want to see a structural change to Egypt's system of governance. They want to see real changes to the constitution. They want to see a release of political prisoners. They want to see an end to the emergency law, and they want to see, more importantly, Egypt under a civilian leadership, not one that is ruled by military committees, or particularly those close to the military. So that is why, even though the Prime Minister has resigned, Ahmed Shafiq, they still gathered here today demanding these substantial changes and say that they will continue to maintain that public pressure until all of their demands are met.
Ayman, and certainly in terms of what's happening behind you, the thousands of people in Tahrir Square, it's a very different atmosphere in the square, certainly an atmosphere of celebration rather than protest.
Well, indeed, you know, since President Hosni Mubarak stepped down from power, and really, quite frankly, throughout the course of Egypt's revolution, Tahrir has really become the symbolic heart of Egypt's struggle for freedom. And certainly throughout the several weeks that they've been gathering here, the protesters have always maintained a very festive atmosphere. You only see Egyptian flags waving. You hear a lot of songs. Sometimes we would see people dancing. And the chants themselves that have been adopted by the protesters have always been very positive in spirit, and certainly that has continued today. Even though their demands continue, the atmosphere here has never changed. It has always been very peaceful, one that is always very positive, and today, as you can see, one that is still very much in present large numbers.
All right, Ayman Mohyeddin there in Tahrir Square. Ayman, thank you very much indeed. All right, let's just go back to Libya. These are the latest live pictures coming in from Benghazi. This, of course, one of the key strongholds of the rebels, the city of Benghazi. And, of course, thousands of protesters have gathered now for Friday prayers there. So live pictures coming in from Benghazi in Libya. Let's bring him back, Shadi Ahmed, again. Shadi, what we're seeing here across the Middle East, we were talking to you earlier about it, is that Friday prayers seems to be very much a pivotal point, a focal point for the call to protest.
Exactly. And to see, for example, what happened in Bahrain last Friday, the largest protest in that country's history, and actually one of the largest protests in recent world history. 1 out of every 5 citizens took to the streets. We saw massive numbers in Yemen. So this has become a weekly occurrence where this is a chance for protesters and pro-democracy forces to really show their strength. And at the end of the day, there is strength and safety in numbers. Once protesters reach a critical mass, it's very difficult for the regime to respond effectively. If they use more force, that is going to inflame the passions of the protesters. But if they don't use force, then the opposition will be emboldened to keep on coming out. And that's what we're seeing right now.
And we've seen regimes toppled in Egypt. We were just talking to Ayman Mohyeddin there in Tahrir Square. We've seen regimes toppled in Egypt. We're looking at live pictures now in Benghazi. Going back to Libya, I mean, there's no one formula for this contagion, really, is there? These are very different situations, although the social issues perhaps are still the same. What's the prognosis? What are the prospects for success for this revolution in Libya?
Libya is a big question mark because you still have the ruler in power. And as long as he's there and has loyalists around him, we're going to be in a very dangerous situation. The death toll is in the thousands right now. Some estimates go higher than 3,000 even. So we're talking about major loss of life. So at some point, the rebels are going to have to capture Tripoli and either capture Gaddafi himself or perhaps even kill him for this to come to a resolution. If it does, then Libya is going to be starting from scratch. This is a country that doesn't really have organized political groups. There isn't much of a civil society because Gaddafi wouldn't allow that to emerge. So we're talking about building and rebuilding institutions from scratch. And that's where Libya is different than, say, Egypt, which does have institutions already in place, as well as opposition parties.
Let's just signpost to our viewers, if you're just joining us here on Al Jazeera English, these are live pictures you're seeing now of Friday prayers in Benghazi in Libya, obviously the key stronghold for the rebels who at the moment are taking on the pro-Gaddafi forces. Shadi Ahmed is with us in the studio just talking us through much of the events across the Middle East and of course focusing on Libya. I mean, you know, the rebels hold this key city of Benghazi, which we're seeing now live on our screens, Shadi. But how difficult is the fight going to be in terms of taking control of the rest of the country? We were talking about just the vast distances involved.
There is the issue of distance. There is the issue of weaponry and capability. The anti-Gaddafi rebels are a bit of a hodgepodge of different groups and militias coming together. They don't really have a unified command structure. And so it'll be very challenging for them to really retake these parts of the parts of the West. A critical factor here is whether or not the forces loyal to Gaddafi decide to defect. That's going to be really key here. If more and more